This short talk on Franciscan spirituality is an invitation to challenge a mindset that is corrosive, destructive, and does not serve our highest good as a child of God in service. Here I'd like to just focus briefly on how Franciscan spirituality reaches out to God's poorest. Franciscan spirituality encompasses service of the needy and the poor. And in these categories, we also have to take into account the marginalized in our society. And you know as well as I that status carries such an importance, doesn't it? A good education, coming from the right family, even your postcode, it's like a lottery. Yes. I remember as a young nursing monk in Northern Ireland, yes, we were caught up in all the strife and the troubles back in the late 60s, and I could never really understand why Christians were tearing one another apart. But then I was made aware by one of our other younger monks, Brother Eddie, my dear friend, and he came from the Falls Road, which was the Catholic area. But then on the opposite side of the spectrum was the Protestant catchment area. And the two, there was a dividing line of hate. Real hate. An intolerance. An abuse of God's love. And yet, both sides were as guilty as the other, because they would both go to church and they would sing God's praises on a Sunday morning, and they would leave God's house as Catholics and non-Catholics and kill one another. Why? So Franciscan spirituality isn't a theoretical exercise. It's not like the Ignatian exercises. It's not entering a Bible-bashing, born-again fraternity. The spirituality that Francis left us was rooted in the teachings of the barefoot Galilean on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's about embracing all of God's children, regardless of their belief, regardless of their status in life, regardless of where they live, regardless of which university they went to, regardless of which prison they spent time in, regardless of the color of their skin, even their sexual orientation. And I know some have picked me up for always mentioning those dreaded words, sexual orientation. Well, let me share this with you. I have lived in a monastic community and supported many young men and women who consecrated their lives to God, who discovered later on in life we were all slow learners, because when we entered the monastic life as men and women, we were still in our prime. Many of us were still teenagers. And we were just coming to terms with our sexual orientation. But the theology of the day was oppressive. And many discovered that they had feelings for their own sex. And when they encountered the wrath of their church and the teachings that such a lifestyle or feelings was an aberration, was against God's law. Wait for this, because this is where it hurts. Many committed suicide. Some even hung themselves because they felt cheap. They were made to feel inferior, sinful. Is this what loving God is all about? Well, for me, Franciscan spirituality brings it up a notch, and it embraces all. It embraces the marginalized in our society. And Francis is a role model like Jesus, because Francis was there for the lepers when other religious orders walked past. Francis, like little Mother Teresa of Calcutta, that little Albanian woman who was down in the gutter on her knees caring for the dying. These are the true children of God today. These are the ambassadors that touch lives. Abandon the rhetoric. Roll up your sleeves and get stuck in. That's Franciscan spirituality. And it's about honoring the divine in each person. It's about embracing the divine in the vulnerable, the poor of the poor, the poorest of the poor. And it's about embracing men and women whose lifestyles are different to us. Though I live a celibate life as a monastic, but that doesn't say that I am better than anybody. Far from it. So what is the teaching of Francis with regard to service? Well, we only have to look at the example he gave us. And his example was rooted in the teachings of the barefoot Galilean. Whatever you do for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do for me. And whoever you love, whoever you give a cup of water to in my name, you are giving it to me. That seems to be the blueprint of Franciscan spirituality in relation to service. And in a world today where we've lost sight of simple service, isn't it time that we allowed our hearts to rule our lives rather than our head, which is more focused on rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous, or having a few minutes fame on the box? So Franciscan spirituality is a way of life that demonstrates the beating heart of a loving God in action. In action. And I see Franciscan spirituality as God's siren, God's alarm bell. And that's why I feel so privileged to be part of a loving community where I know our members who embrace the monastic life from their own home. We're not all in a huge monastery together looking pretty, wearing the nicest of habits where there isn't a crease. Oh no. Quite a few of our members, some are living as hermits in the inner cities. And I know in New York we have Sister Alison, a beautiful woman who's a Jewess, an ordained interfaith minister and a member of our community, who befriends women in prison, who supports women who have done time, who reaches out to God's marginalized, society's marginalized, I should say, the rejects of our society, to women who are hungry for love. And I remember last Christmas and New Year, we did a vigil on Christmas Eve for 2 hours on live stream and again on New Year's Eve, and Sister Alison brought in her laptop and allowed the women join us for those 2-hour vigils for global peace and unity and peace amongst all faiths. That is Franciscan spirituality in service.